So, do you ever tell yourself not to do something and then do it anyway? I did that with this devlog. I literally have it written in my script doc not to stray from the criteria I put in place for this devlog. So, you know what I decided to do? Why try and make things easy for myself when I can instead rework every single gameplay mechanic of Journey of the Fallen God for a new perspective? So, yeah, I reworked the entire game for a first-person perspective. With that said, let me tell you everything that has changed in Journey of the Fallen God since the last devlog. So, yeah, I decided to transition Journey of the Fallen God from third person to first. I did this for quite a few different reasons. The biggest of which being how much easier it is to develop in first person than third, which will in the future allow me to deliver you a much more polished game. The second reason of which is a quite common one for first person being used in game design, which is the fact that it's just generally more immersive, allowing you, the player, to enjoy the game much more. With that rant over, let me tell you what went into transitioning to first person. Ironically, the biggest change between first and third person was actually the easiest to implement, with that being the actual camera position, as that was just as simple as repositioning the camera to the head location and tweaking a few settings. What was difficult though was actually adapting my character's movement system to work in first person without having to completely recreate it. The first part of reworking the movement system wasn't that hard either. All I had to do was enable a setting in my movement system to align movement to rotation. What was hard was making sure the player body would rotate with the camera. Luckily, my character movement system already had a rotate in place system, so all I had to do to fix that was to tweak a little code to make sure it always remained active. Once I'd finished converting the basics of the game to first person, I knew that I needed to address the game's combat system, since traditionally third-person systems don't translate well to first person. I knew before changing anything, I needed to test it first without any changes, so I could find what I needed to change. To my surprise, what I had already created actually did work quite well in the first person with only a few minor issues, the primary of which was that your attacks did not rotate with your view. This though was a relatively easy fix, calling only for me to bend the character's spine to align with the camera and therefore align the animations for attacking with the camera. This though wasn't the end of updates to the combat system, as I finally decided to add something I'd been planning for a while. That thing would be the game's new bow and arrow system. This was far more complex to implement compared to previous weapons I've implemented because it required its own complete logic to function, whereas other weapons I've implemented reuse the same logic, just with variable animations. To simplify the game's bow and arrow system, it first checks if the player has a bow, then performs actions to pull back the bowstring, enables an idle state for holding the bow drawn, and then performs actions to release the bow and launch the arrow. With all this work done to the game's combat system, I knew that I had to add something for the player to fight, and so I finally implemented the game's first and most common enemy, the warrior. The warrior is essentially a common adventure game enemy, patrolling for enemies, chasing enemies, and attacking enemies. I'm not going to go too in-depth with programming the AI for the warrior, because I hate programming AI, but I am going to tell you that I made sure to make the AI modular, so in the future adding more enemies won't be nearly as difficult. Having an enemy to fight allowed me to test the game's combat system much more thoroughly, and revealed to me that it needed something I had been contemplating adding. That thing being lock-on and dodge. This thankfully wasn't that difficult to add, with the lock-on system merely requiring getting all nearby enemies, sorting them by distance to the player, and making the player look at each one by using the scroll wheel. Dodge was not that difficult to add either, as it merely required checking if the player was locked onto an enemy and applying a launch force to the player depending on a specific key press. That's not everything that has changed between now and the last devlog, but it is the most major, as it is taking JFG from what was essentially a bunch of unconnected systems to something that resembles the start of a game. I probably should mention though that I did also completely recreate the game's village system to make villages even more varied and much more stable, and create a basic dialogue system, and finally added swimming, something I've been meaning to add since devlog 1. So, with all that said, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and invite you to subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date with Journey of Fallen God's development. Thank you for watching.